We now turn to the future of energy mix, a session discussing public-private investment, blended energy approaches, and Africa's participation in emerging technologies. Moderating this session, I'm excited to introduce to you the Deputy Managing Partner, Oneka Cindy Ojokbo. I don't know, the applause is a bit tired, guys. Come on. Do you not see the lady? Joining Oneka, please help me welcome to the stage CEO, Levene Energy, Nzan Ogbe. Also joining Oneka, please help me welcome Regional Carbon and Innovation Lead Africa, Anglo-American Stan Pillay. Also with Stan, we have the Managing Director, Green Asset Exchange, Nick Run. And lastly, please help me give a warm welcome to Group Executive Strategic Delivery ESCOM, Alfred Sima.
Thank you, Nkrumah. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing today? I mean, it's been an exciting day. I expect more energy. Honorable Minister, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an interesting panel. Our panel will focus on investing in Africa's energy mix, really touching into how public and private partnership and investments might create new energy additions, affordable energy for the populace. I have a distinguished panelists here from different fields and different countries, really. So we expect a robust discussion, actionable discussion, just speaking to what the last speaker spoke about. And without further ado, I will jump right into it. I know that we're running against time. And I'll start with Nzan to my right, really. Africa's energy future must balance hydrocarbons, renewables, and emerging clean technologies. What policy reforms or investment frameworks are most urgently needed to support a blended energy mix that reflects Africa's reality whilst attracting competitive global capital?
Thank you very much, Cindy. I'd like to crave the indulgence of the Honorable Minister and other distinguished guests here. I arrived last night with my childhood friend, Kola Karim. And as we arrived, I'm putting up at Mr. Folawiyo's home because I couldn't find accommodation. And as I walked in, he broke the news to me that we had lost a great icon and a personal friend of myself and a lot of people here back home in Nigeria. So if you don't mind, I'd like for us to observe a moment of silence for Mr. Segun Awolowo, who was, his last two official assignments was he was the head of the NIPC, which is the Nigerian Investment Promotion Council, and he's also, I believe, secretary of the AFTA as well. So those are two significant positions that have pushed the narrative around investment into Nigeria as a country. And it's a big, big, big loss for me personally and for Nigeria as a country, and I believe the continent as well. So if you don't mind, just a 2-second moment of silence, and I'll come back to your question. Thank you.
Absolutely.
May the soul of the dearly departed rest in perfect peace, and may God grant him eternal rest. Thank you. Back to your question. I believe that investment in the sector cannot be binary. We can't look at just one way of coming into the sector. I mean, I take my business as an example. We are originally an oil and gas company. We started off trading, and we have traded significant barrels of crude oil out of Nigeria and imported significant volumes of refined products into Nigeria and the rest of West Africa. My story, as it pertains to this conversation, started with when, in 2019, we won a number of blocks in Equatorial Guinea, and we were looking for funding to develop those blocks. And we went around all over Europe, Natixis, ING, all the big banks. And the story at the time was you needed to have an ESG plan, otherwise no one was going to fund you. And we looked at the whole landscape and looked at gas as a transition fuel, started to take a position on gas distribution, but found out that that was a huge ticket for a company of our size as at 2019, and decided to settle on solar as an energy source and as a transition fuel. We have since then built a 100 megawatt solar manufacturing plant in Nigeria, We started exporting our first set of panels into Ghana 2 months ago. And we are looking at other countries within the West African region and hopefully looking at other places outside of Africa. Funding for that project was a major challenge. We had a business plan 2 years earlier, went around a number of banks trying to secure funding. We thought, okay, well, we've got this ESG strategy now. Then it should be easy for us to fund this from the capital markets locally or look at the international market. That story lasted for about 9 months. When we couldn't make any traction, I said to my guys, look, we're going to have to buckle up, cut some fat, and start to invest directly. And we started to invest, bought a factory space, put a deposit for the factory, and started to run. And 12 months later, we had built a factory. And we've done 3 cycles of raw materials and are selling. And yet we still haven't accessed the financing. Well, that's the ESG story as it affects Nigeria. And since then, we started to look at the market. We're doing fairly well within the WAF zone, as we call it. But we find that funding needs to be blended. So we're looking at private capital, so investors like ourselves, the parent company, investing in this significantly. But we're also talking to companies like Helios, the Afrexim Bank, Bank of Industry, and we're looking at putting together a pool of funds to help us deploy power into not just Nigeria, but the rest of Africa. Because we find that the biggest challenge, and I listened to Kola speak earlier, and he made a point, and he spoke eloquently, but he made a point about the problem in Africa being poverty. That's the only point with which I digress with him on. I think the problem with Africa is energy access. Because if you have energy access, as we've seen in Nigeria, Nigerians don't need anything else. They would create, they will innovate, and they will build. And so we've set up on this journey to create energy access for Africa, and that would only come if the government, working with the multilaterals and working with the local banks, come together to create a pool of funds that can be accessed by everyone to deploy energy across board. That for me would be what I consider to be a solution. Thank you.
Great. If I can bring in Alfred here from an ESCOM perspective, I mean, one of a power generation company that has suffered some challenges in the recent past. What is your take? Do you agree with Nzan, or what is it, especially in the South African context?
I think for me, there's a couple of things that's quite important. Sorry, maybe let me just recognize Minister. Thank you for your presence and the organizers of the conference. For me personally, there's quite a number of things that are quite important. Yeah, the first one, it's leadership. Yeah, so we listened to our 2 ministers talk about the journey that we have traveled as South Africa, and you could sense that there's quite a lot of thinking that's going into determining the policy regime, which is the first thing we need to get right overall in Africa. Because without proper policies, we are unable to attract investment that is credible. Yeah? In the previous panel, there was quite a lot of talk around, rules and laws. Unfortunately, for investment, rules and laws are important. Yeah? They create the framework under which investment and capital can be mobilized. Yeah? So if you look at South Africa's context, yeah, we have been going through an extended period of energy interruption. And even during that period, by the way, we have been deploying, which is now on the grid, 9 gigawatts worth of 140 odd new investments in the grid. Yeah? Under what regime was that done? In the previous IRP. In the new IRP, we still have policy certainty that enables further investment to happen. And on the back of that investment, you can attract, on the back of that policy, you can attract capital. I also need to say something about the development of policy. If you have been monitoring how the IRP has been developed, there's been an extensive consultation process. Okay. For some people, it becomes very tricky. Why? Because what the South African government, and in particular previously the DMRE and now the Department of Energy and Electricity, has taken time to consult far and wide with every South African. Why is that important? Policy development must get the buy-in of the people that will be affected by that policy. Yeah, sometimes not comfortable because you get a very diverse view of what needs to be happening. Yeah, so I'll give a couple of examples. On the one side, we do know, and the minister spoke extensively to it, that we need stable base load to enable us to sustainably supply energy that enables the unlocking of further investment. On the other side, we do need to transition into cleaner energies, including renewables, including clean coal, including gas, including pumped hydro, including nuclear. So if you look at the policy framework that has been created now with the IRP, current IRP, we've got that balance. What does that do? It enables capital to be deployed to fast track the delivery of energy into the market. So that's quite important, I think, from three perspectives. One is leadership. Two, a very clear framework policy. And three, the implementation. And that implementation comes from the mobilization of capital that will enable Africa to transition to a different future.
Okay, so thanks, Alfred. And Nick, I want to bring you in here because you're coming from Green Asset Exchange, focused on, AI, renewable energy, and the carbon markets. And we're speaking to how the private sector can really work with the government to ensure that policies are up to date and they're relevant as far as creating new power additions or energy additions in South Africa, in the African continent, and in the world on a larger scale. What is your take on this?
Yeah, again, I'd just like to thank the Energy Council for having us, and great to be here with you too, Minister, and the other guests on here. There's quite a few things that I've noticed today. So, the green assets essentially allow you to get better finance. It's used for projects that are not usually feasible to bring them to becoming feasible. So you can use that as a financial tool that can then be used to offset and get the better returns. South Africa is in a great place, I think, moving forward in terms of its energy. I think there's a lot of energy projects going on. I think there's some issues with grid transmission, but there's no shortage of projects. I think there is a little bit of a backlog. There's definitely special interest groups that are still hanging on. I mean, it's cheaper to produce renewable energy than it is now to do coal. I have to hold myself back from laughing sometimes. I don't think there is such thing as clean coal. But at the same time, I don't think the rest of the world can say to us that we cannot use coal or other hydrocarbons to industrialize ourselves. The rest of the world has done it. They can't now tell Africa we cannot do it. So I think it's very important that we do, and it's part of our energy mix, and we do push that forward. As was mentioned many times, there's 600 million Africans that don't have energy, and we're looking at clean cook stoves, right? There's a lot of talk about clean cook stoves today, which is great because females have to go out, get the wood, fetch it. There's the health implications of it, but at the same time, is that really what we aspire for Africans? Is clean cooking? Is that where we are going with this? So I think that is a big thing for me as a problem going forward, is we really need to look at having greater ambitions than clean cooking. Benefication of resources and taking those resources to the rest of the world. Why are we just exporting our resources? What hasn't been mentioned today is all of our smelters are closing down in South Africa. We're going to lose hundreds of thousands of jobs. Why are we doing that? So there's some really important things that we need to look at, but I think our ambitions as Africans needs to be a lot higher.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Nzan here on that conversation. Just your take on that. If I can paraphrase what Nick is saying, like our focus shouldn't be on the next, say, not from going from 1 to 2, but creating long-term strategies, right, for more socioeconomic empowerment or growth in Africa and the country, and in fact exporting also to the global markets as well. How has the private sector, from your take, I mean, most of you are private sector here, how are you working with the government to make this happen and creating long-term strategies for energy additions, affordability, and of course, access on the continent?
So I agree with him completely in terms of how the narrative has been pushed. I told you my story about how I got into solar. which isn't my primary or wasn't my primary business. And that was based on what I would say the West called the ESG plan, which to a large extent doesn't, we in Africa, like he said, haven't even started scratching the surface in terms of utilizing our natural resources. Now, we went off on a tangent, left our core business, well, not left it completely, but diversified our core business just to tick a box. Okay? In ticking that box, of course, thankfully, we've seen a huge opportunity for bridging the gap of a lack of energy access to Africans, which is a big problem. But here we are today. We have the leader of the world who has decided that ESG doesn't mean anything. So all of that hard work, all of that investment, technically, means nothing. I could have kept on my hydrocarbon journey and kept drilling as we have done in the past and developing my assets, but it's changed. So as private sector, we would keep trying to work with the narrative of what has been determined, but we also need to innovate and also advocate. As we've done in Nigeria, we realized in manufacturing in Nigeria that if I brought in a panel fully manufactured from China into Nigeria, I don't pay any duties. If I brought in components from China into Nigeria, I pay 15% duties on solar cells. How does that make sense? The Chinese guy is getting between 9 to 15% rebate from his country. He comes into Nigeria, doesn't pay duty. I am investing, I'm creating jobs. I've spent significant sums of money, running into tens of millions of dollars without accessing financing, and created this whole opportunity where government is taxing me and I'm employing people, and yet I'm asked to pay duties. So we're making some advocation. The current administration is looking at things and they're pushing a bit slower than we hoped for, but we just keep pushing. But we see, next couple of weeks, I'll be in Central African Republic. There's a demand. They have 200 megawatt demand for solar to replace their current hydro power solutions for their mines. Same thing in Zambia. And the story is the same in most African countries. So there's an opportunity, but we need to keep pushing the boundaries and advocating for support to access the financing that's needed. Unfortunately, when I started this journey, everyone said, oh, there's a lot of money once you get into the green space. We are not seeing that money yet. Hopefully it will come someday. Yeah.
Yeah, sadly. It's been the story for most people. I want to bring in Stanley here from Anglo American, a company that has innovated really, created or is creating successfully to some extent a regional renewable ecosystem across Southern Africa really. How has that been for you? What has been your experience, success story? How's the process been for Anglo America?
Sure.
Pivot in this manner.
Thank you, Anika. Thank you for the opportunity. And if we could also acknowledge our minister, Mr. Manatasha. Before I get to answer that, I'd like to give a shout out to the B20 paper, the task force on energy mix and just transition. I think they've released a really good document, and it answers some of the questions that were raised just now on how do we make progress. And I think it gives some really good direction on how we get the cost of finance down, how do we get localization moving, and how do we get skilling. So if you haven't read it, I think it's something worth tackling. So coming back to Anglo American. So we set up a company called Nvusa Energy. Nvusa Energy is a JV between Anglo American and EDF. It's currently constructing 520 megawatts of renewables. It's a combination of embedded PV and wheeled PV and wind to our operating sites in Limpopo and in Mpumalanga. But how did we get there? So at that point, Anglo American had operations in Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, and the bulk of it in South Africa. And we were faced with a couple of objectives we needed to tackle. One was the point you were making about the cost of energy, right? So the cost of energy was going this way, and the cost of energy as a component of your operating costs was just escalating, getting to a point that it's becoming a problem. And the other point was we had to decarbonize. We set ourselves an internal target that we needed to decarbonize aggressively. But we needed to do this in an environment where we were challenged with power within South Africa at that point. So you couldn't, you had to look at this thing holistically. So we did a fair bit of techno-economic modeling. So we looked at all our operations, and we looked at what are the best resources to supply energy at the lowest cost. So that's what we optimized for. And the non-negotiable is we needed a stable grid. So if anything, we needed to contribute to ensuring the grid remained stable. The point Alfred was making also that the policy environment had to be there to attract investments. So what we found was that we could reduce the cost of power to operations significantly, 30%. We could help stabilize the grid by bringing more electrons into the grid, and we could decarbonize. And we could do this effectively for our operations in the region, not just South Africa. But the challenges we sat with was the interconnections between some of the, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Namibia, and the Northern Cape in particular weren't quite there. But we could manage it within South Africa. So we ended up building these PV and wind and embedded generation, and we're in the process of actually constructing it now, and it will deliver against those objectives. But I think the point I would like to make is if we could have those interconnectors working the way we would want it, we could get to 90% of our annual energy demand, right? If you take our kilowatt hours or gigawatt hours that you need in an entire year, we could decarbonize 90% of that and still support the grid without adding issues to frequency or energy on the grid. So the challenge is, I think, when we start to look at this, and I term it structured flexibility, right? So we need structure, and the grid has to be there. We need to strengthen it. We need to enhance it. But we need flexibility in how we bring in lower cost generation in a modular way, right? And that could have application beyond just what we looked at for Anglo-American.
Yeah.
I think and in one way to look at it is there a concept for a master plan? And you don't have to build it all in one go because it takes decades to really get infrastructure and transmission lines running across. But you can do components of it, whether it's mini grids, microgrids, or grid strengthening and then generation coming onto it in almost like a jigsaw puzzle. But they all make sense and they bring efficiency into the system. So it's not that we have to wait for the grids to be built, but we need to think about it differently, think about it in terms of structured flexibility and modular application of renewables.
Yeah, I see the rest of the panelists agreeing with you. So I want to bring in Alfred here from ESCOM. He spoke about infrastructure, really, and this is something that I feel like you interact with on a daily basis. We often hear about the state of the infrastructure, and especially in the power sector, dilapidated, it's outdated, it needs to be upgraded. What steps are being taken at the moment to modernize this infrastructure, from the transmission to the storage to just the Africa's grid as a whole, to allow for multi-energy system across the sector? What step has been taken in South Africa or across Africa from the best of your?
Oh, thank you for that. Where do I start? Maybe let's start with where we should learn. Yeah.
We can start there.
So if you look at the US and Europe, they've got a very mature interconnected grid. Yeah. Europe, let's use Europe as an example. It took Europe 30 years, for them to do three things that are quite critical, So this is where Africa should copy and paste, but do it better, So that infrastructure development that interconnects Europe was set on the back of one thing. Europe said, we are going to have one single interconnected market for electricity. That brought 30 countries together under one umbrella to say, how do we now coexist with nuclear in France, gas in the north, hydro in the Scandinavian countries, and guess what? Even coal in Germany. That interconnectedness was driven by one vision. What we need to do and learn as Africans is that we will need to develop structures, policies that connects us individually and collectively. but we've got challenges. Yeah? So let's start with South Africa. Yeah? One of our challenges, I think, up to today, we have been humbled that we have been able to bring confidence to the energy space in South Africa by providing electricity for more than 97% of the time. What has that done? That has created investment confidence that has now re-looked at South Africa in a very different way. Yeah? My point is that we do have to look at the individual country nuances and correct for that. Yeah? Before we talk about a big interconnected grid in Africa, Africa is not uniform. There are many differences between the countries. It does not mean we cannot aspire to have one interconnected grid. Yeah? But there's no point in having an interconnected grid when the rural communities, we talk about these microgrids, off-grid solutions, when you look at, and I'll use myself as an example, I grew up in Kimberley. Yeah? We grew up in a mining town. Yeah? That mining town had quite a lot of development. Yeah? It was the largest mine in actually the diamond producers in the world. Yeah? But I grew up with no electricity. When I wrote matric, I did not have electricity. Yeah? So what the mines were solving for did not address the social need in Galeshewe. So we cannot look at this internationalization, these lofty visions, ignoring the realities of people on the ground. Yeah? So these rural communities, people who need to have access, universal access to electricity is important. There's no point in building a huge interconnect from Cape to Cairo when I cannot study with electricity. Yeah? So we need to copy and paste what Europe has done, but do it better by addressing challenges that we have in Africa, bringing electricity to our people, making sure that that innovator sitting in the rural community can get access so that in a couple of years' time, they can give us even better solution. How do we do it? By deploying technology in a much better way, by making sure that when the social contributions, social commitments are being made, yeah, they are delivered to the communities where it does matter. So quite important. So this interconnected grid, I think it's a very good thing, yeah, but without addressing the specific challenges that our communities are facing, it becomes quite challenging. I think Minister, I'll borrow from you if you don't mind, yeah? The ability of South Africa to move from 30-odd% electricity to 95% electricity has brought a lot of South Africans into the light to enable them to add value in a different way. Yeah? And we need to respond to that reality in the rest of Africa. The 600 million Africans that need access to electricity, they must have we must give that priority. Why? Because that's where our innovation is sitting. So we have to address the local nuances without losing the opportunity to interconnect Africa and deliver this integrated network that will enable Africa to co-create a future that is much different. We don't have to take 30 years. We can do it much faster. But just by the way, the IRP is giving us in South Africa 15 years to deliver 100 gigawatts worth of electricity. We have not been able to, there is no country that has managed to deliver that amount of electricity in such a short space of time.
And then I want to bring you here as well, I mean, from a Nigerian perspective, because Nigeria also suffers from infrastructure deficiency and deficit, really, especially with interconnectivity from distribution all the way, generation all the way to transmission. What practical steps do you see in addition to what Alfred just said?
So infrastructure is expensive business. It's not something that can be embarked on by anyone without deep pockets. We as a company, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, in our gas play, because we realize that solar on its own cannot solve the problem, because there are areas, Nigeria is such a huge, vast country that there are regions like where I come from. It rains 8 months in the year. Your irradiance there is very limited. So we invested in, and a part of a consortium acquiring what would potentially be the largest indigenous non-government-owned gas distribution company in the country. And hopefully by next week we would have that announcement. So I'm not naming names. But his point is very correct, because there needs to be that level of energy mix for you to be able to address the problems that exist in Africa. And look, private sector can do what it wants to do, but even if it's just to have guarantees by government or regulations that are supportive of the efforts of private sector, that would go a long way, okay? We're closing this transaction. Our expected fees to one of the regulators is 2.5% of a huge ticket, okay? Going back to government coffers, it's a $500 million deal. So look at that. If that, for instance, could be reduced, it would allow us to invest even more in that space. But sometimes when you have these conversations, they're telling you, oh, we also have been mandated to generate revenue as a government agency. But you're doing that at the cost of development, because we've taken this deep dive into investing in an area that government would struggle to raise the funding to. We've been able to access this funding, some of it from South African banks here, some of it from other places. But we do need that support to be able to maximize and expand on the infrastructure that we've created. We've got 400 kilometers now. It could be 1,000 kilometers in a year or two if we had the right support.
Yeah. I think it was Alfred. Alfred mentioned technology, and I just want to, dive deep on that, because the continent really has been sort of like a consumer as far as new technologies is concerned. And we've discussed here that investing in technology might be a way to create innovative solutions to some of the challenges that we face. How then can we make sure that the continent becomes a co-creator or a manufacturer of the next generation of technologies that could change or advance the industry? Anybody can take this one. I'm not going to foist it on you.
Well, I think if you don't mind.
No, please.
Oh, sure. Well, I think, if we look at this, where's the world moving right now? It's, internet connection, you need data centers, you need the infrastructure. This morning the guy joked about your creators making more money than anyone else at the moment. But Africa can't beat those creators if they're not connected. Mm-hmm. So, I think, Africans are hugely resilient. They're very good at teaching themselves. If they have the opportunity, they will do it. Access to information. So I think if we could move along and leverage the energy to give people access, and as was mentioned in the previous talk, leapfrog technologies. It's really important now to leapfrog technologies, get access to energy, for basic energy. Internet's not a huge thing. But we pay more than that here than anywhere else in the world. But if we gave the youth they need to create 1 billion jobs in the next 20 years. If we give the youth access to that information, I think we would be hugely successful.
Alfred?
Can I give it a shot as well? We've got a lot of talk around 600 million Africans that are waiting to be unleashed. Yeah? Unfortunately, if they don't have access to electricity, they are unable to access the technology we are talking about. I think in the previous panel, we were asked if we all have this thing. Yeah, all of us do have it. Unfortunately, this thing does need energy. Yeah. So one of the levers that we have is to make sure that there is connectivity, universal access for every African. Yeah. The basics have to be in place. Yeah. Once those basics are in place, then we will be able to leapfrog the rest of the world. Yeah, because we will be able to deliver education to spaces in Africa that are not accessible. Yeah, why? Simply because we've got connectivity of energy, and it doesn't have to be through a big transmission or distribution network. It can be through a local, self-contained microgrid that enables access for that community. And in ESCOM, we are doing that. We are looking at areas that are far from the distribution network, but they've also got a need for access to energy and electricity, and we are deploying microgrids to enable communities where it is too expensive to deliver huge grids for a small community. The banks, by the way, will tell you that it is not economic. You've got a community of 50 households in a rural village, you want to bring a big network, bring transmission line, it becomes very tricky. Yeah? So deploying these microgrids is quite strategic to enable that access for those 600 million Africans that do not have access. Once those basics are in place, I think for us to leapfrog using technology becomes easier. So energy is quite critical for access or for us to deliver this technology enablement for Africa to develop much faster than what the West has been able to do.
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
right.
sure. Thanks. The other side of the same coin, to be honest. So my sense is the cadence of investment, the scale of investment. If we can bring investments into energy, into Africa, at a scale and cadence over time that's substantial, you will force OEMs to relocate. You will force tertiary institutions to rethink how they educate. You will start to get pipelines of highly skilled people coming through. So I think the trick for us is how do we build a bankable cadence of investment at scale that makes it meaningful for people? Look, we don't have to invent everything here. There's lots of technology that we desperately need that makes sense for them to actually manufacture and do their research in our part of the world. Right? And how do we get our research organizations behind it? How do we get our universities and schools behind it? And the only way you're going to do that is scale. And the only way you're going to get scale is investment. So we need to get a program of massive cadence of investments over decades, because that's what it's going to take. And we need to convince the funders and the technology providers that this is where they need to be, where Africa is the next place, the next horizon for them to be at. So, that's the...
And then?
Okay, I mean, I came to this country for the first time in 1995, much younger then, no gray hair. And I thought, I found Europe and the West in Africa. I love it here. And I remember there was a month I came to this country 4 times, just because. Every single excuse. I had meetings we could do on the telephone. I don't know, I'll come over. And I came here. And at the time, Nigeria was generating something in the region of about 3,000 megawatts of power. South Africa then, with about 150 million population. South Africa at the time probably was about 30 million. I can't remember. 40, exactly. 40 megawatts. And we are in 2025. And a few years ago, we saw South Africa also struggle with load shedding and all of that, which was shocking to me. I used to live in Somerset West for a few years, and it's amazing how these things affect people and investments. My family and I lived well, technically my family, because I used to just come in and out. We lived in Somerset West in the Western Cape for 4 years. And then there were the issues around xenophobia, which is a different conversation. And then there were issues around load shedding and all of those things. And it informed the decision for me to move my family to Europe. Because I thought, okay, well, this isn't quite working. But I say that to say that, circle back almost 3 decades later, and South Africa, I don't know what you're generating now, but Nigeria is generating peak 4,500 megawatts. And you have an off-grid demand of 24 gigawatts. And that can only, in my opinion, be filled largely by mini-grids, micro-grids, and the like, because they're mostly in rural communities where you won't have access to energy. But despite that, and this to tell you how impactful this is, Nigeria has produced 4 or 5 unicorns in that same environment. Imagine what would happen if you had energy access for the teeming population. I think we are probably 60, 70% under 40 years of age in Nigeria. Imagine what would happen in a country like Nigeria if you had access to energy. So I think the answer is with us. We'll keep pushing the narrative as businessmen, but we need help.
Indeed. We're just going to wrap this up because I've been told that I don't have any more time. So I'm going to ask you the last question for four of you. Quickly, 30 seconds if possible. If you could prioritize one actionable step that would most transform Africa's energy landscape by 2035, what would it be and why? Nzan, I'll start with you.
Me?
No, start with him. If you're thinking I can go to Stan, Stan, do you want to take that?
So I wasn't expecting that. If you just run that by being here. So I still insist. I mean, people say the problem with Africa is corruption, the problem is poverty. I totally disagree. There's corruption everywhere. I've seen poverty I live half the time in poverty in England, in areas of England. I've seen poverty in the United States of America. But yet those economies are improving. There's poverty in India. India is growing in leaps and bounds. There's poverty. I've been to places in China where people walked up to me holding my hand and rubbing to see if you will rub up. Places like Ningbo. China is growing in leaps and bounds. And there is corruption there, institutional corruption. So the problem isn't corruption. I still insist that the problem, you can only industrialize a nation when you have energy. Energy brings security, brings everything else to the table. So for me, my view is simple. And I'm throwing my hat in the ring. I'm not just saying it. We've invested, like I said, significantly in gas and gas distribution. We invested significantly in solar. We are upscaling our 650 megawatts, fully in the and we're not looking at just Nigeria or just West Africa. We're looking at the rest of the continent. Happy to work with the South African government as well to deploy solar here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Nick, can I come to you?
Yeah, look, I think we need to protect our resources more, both natural and in the ground resources. You know, the companies are extracting and using fancy tax structures to avoid paying taxes and keeping the money here. We're allowing our resources to leave without benefiting them. You know, the only forest in the world that's still absorbing carbon is in the Congo. I think we need to maybe look at more unification of Africa, making decisions together and being more hardline. If the world needs our resources, then they must pay for them. If the world needs us to join in this decarbonization effort, then they must pay us for not going along the same lines as they do. This whole risk that we dealt with earlier, you know, if we look at the GDPs of debt to GDP ratios, I mean, Nigeria is at 54%, South Africa's at 74, France is at 117, America's at 123. Every time there's a financial crisis, America just prints more money, and now our currency gets devalued. I think we need to look at the whole structures of how we use our resources and leverage that to push for better deals for Africa.
Alfred?
Yeah, I think for me, the one opportunity, and I'm going to use South Africa as an example once again, is that we've got a very balanced IRP that enables us to deploy gas, renewables, hydro, everything. Everything is in there in a very balanced way. The opportunity that's ahead of us is that this creates 2.2 trillion rands worth of industrialization on the back of energy. Yeah? If we can get that right, that will really help us to create a model that we can replicate all over Africa, where we can take what we have as a natural market, convert it into an industrial base of note with our own market, using our own people, our own resources to develop industries that are so much needed for the socio-economic challenges that we have.
Thank you very much, everyone. You've heard the panelists. I mean, it's the truth. A blended energy mix is required in Africa, and this can only be achieved by, African resources, African realities, and of course, African ambition. You cannot take it from us. If we believe that we can do it, we put our heads together and do the right things, from smart policies, as you mentioned, technological adoption, investments, and of course, public and private sector partnership. We cannot undermine the effect of the PPP. It's relevant to pushing leaps and bounds in the energy sector. We will definitely achieve the blended energy mix that will move Africa forward in terms of energy access and affordability. Thank you all for listening to us, and thank you, the panelists. A round of applause for my panelists, please.
Thank you.